Good morning, good morning, everyone. So in today's lecture is just our last lecture, and I think it's eight in a number of lectures because we're required to give 8 lectures in this very dense semester, the very short semester. And in our final lecture, I'll take you around very quickly an overview of what we had before we talked about unit and process of translation, how translation should be done, like if it's literal, if it's a free translation, and we looked into different definitions of a process and a unit, and we had different techniques where you can apply them in your life career. And also we talked about grammatical problems from Ghazala's book, where he offers so many problems that students may face, or professionals or new translators feel that would commit. And he would offer, he adopted the practical approach to translation, where he would offer you the problem and then gives you a solution and suggestions how to avoid it in the future. يعرض المشكلة يجد لها في حل بحيث أن نتجنبها في المستقبل. So we had so many different types. Please go over them again and again in your textbook and in previous lectures. And then we moved into lexical problems. Also, we had different types, so many types of lexical problems where some students face during their um, study, or when they're rendering from one language into another, they would commit such problems like figurative speech, المحسنات البديعية إذا كان اللغة فيها، أو idiomatic expressions. We talked about idiomatic expression اصطلاحية, collocation, the word selection. Some students would face problem with word ordering and word selection as well. So we talk about these problems. We want you to avoid them in your life career. Also, we talked about the different types of methods, techniques of translation, because each stage or each type, we looked into the types of translation as well. We looked into interpreting, the conference interpreting, the simultaneous and consecutive interpretation or translation, where you can find practically in a world. And also we talked about the methods and techniques of translation, the approaches, how we do a translation, a modulation, a free translation, dubbing, or different. All we looked into these in our previous lecture. I think in number 7 lecture we looked at so many different. Sometimes when you offered a text and you're asked to do a translation, you would read the text, you would do analysis of the text, and you then select what sort of translation or method or technique that you may use. If it's modulation, if it's sometimes you can't, for instance, you can't find the equivalent word for the source text when you read into target text. You need an explanation, and that's one technique. إذا كان ما لقيتيش المعنى المقابل، أوقات لازم توفري شروح أو توفر شروح. فكلنا تكلمنا عليه هذا في المحاضرات الماضية. ما لكم إلا أن تطلعوا على الكتب والمحاضرات بحيث أن تأخذوا ملاحظات بالخصوص. Okay, so all these different types you find them on our previous lectures. And in today's lecture class, we will have to take some of a practical translation. I would offer you a taped or recorded speakers in 2 languages from TV channels. I record them to you, and I want you to render them and later submit to me. We will hear English, and then I would want you to translate it into like 5 minutes English listening, and then I want you to translate it into Arabic. Do your best and then we would listen to an Arabic, and I want you to translate it into an English version, and then I look at it and do, and then please try to apply some of the tweaks and some of these. Okay, so yeah, and I'm sure you can do it. Let's move into our next slide, where we listen to an English um, speakers, and then I want you to translate it. So now we will, I'll run you an English speakers, and I want you to translate this excerpt lesson and then translate into Arabic. Okay, hear this excerpt from seen in English and translate it into Arabic, please. So it's a sort of maybe news. Okay, news hour. Be ready, please. Here out.
And he will also trust in science to guide our work on Earth to protect God's creation.
Fred Krupp is the president of the Environmental Defense Fund, and he's joining me now. Thank you so much for joining me. First off, how will Joe Biden be able to roll back all of Trump's rollbacks on environmental policies? How much can be undone by Joe Biden?
Well, Emma, he can do a lot. First of all, of the policies that President Trump has put into place, we've won 80 of 97 court cases because they've been done very sloppily. And especially these last few are being rushed through in a way that makes them, frankly, illegal. So we expect most of what Trump is doing now, perhaps all, to be able to be undone because, frankly, the leases, for instance, in the Arctic are just plainly illegal.
You've said about President-elect Joe Biden that his goal has to be slashing climate pollution. Are you confident he's going to do that?
I am. First of all, the appointment of Secretary Kerry is a great appointment to be climate envoy. Second of all, the president-elect has said he's going to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement on day one. We're the only country in the world that's not part of that. So that's a good sign. And lastly, he's made it clear that he's going to slash climate pollution from the power plants, the electricity producing power plants. Right now, every American should have the opportunity to buy pollution-free electricity. And he's also promised to slash climate pollution and health-causing pollution from cars, trucks, and buses. Those are all commitments that I expect he'll honor.
It's interesting that you bring up the Paris Climate Accord because fittingly, in President Trump's last G20 attendance in recent weeks, he was railing against the climate accord, saying that it's designed to kill the American economy. And like you said, President-elect Joe Biden has said that he would rejoin the accord. Tell us what that would mean in effect and what kind of regulations we will start seeing in the United States to abide by this accord.
Well, first of all, the United States will make its own nationally determined commitment, NDC. That's the jargon for we get to decide what we are going to do ourselves. Secondly, there is the authority under the Clean Air Act for the president to put into place standards to make sure that things like methane pollution from our oil and gas industry are limited. These are standards that President Trump undid. President Biden can put them back in place and make sure there are new standards for all existing oil and gas wells. In addition, he can put these standards in place for power plants, cars, trucks, and buses, as mentioned before.
Fred Krupp, I appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Years ago, when she successfully campaigned to win women the right to drive in Saudi Arabia, but that victory came at a steep price. Lujain Al-Hathloul was arrested. With her case now in the country's National Security and Terrorism Court, her family and human rights activists around the world are increasingly worried for her health and safety. Here's CNN's Nick Robertson.
Saudi Arabia's most well-known female prisoner, Lujain Hathlul, has gone from jailed rights activist to alleged national security threat. Her sister is horrified. She alleges Lujain has been tortured in prison.
My parents saw that she was very weak, that her body was shaking, and that her voice as well. But even with that, she was still very focused and wanted to read her whole defense. Her and other activists were being electrocuted, waterboarded, flogged, beaten, deprived of sleep, force-fed.
Saudi authorities have repeatedly denied allegations of torture and sexual abuse in their jails. Hathlul campaigned for women to drive. Then, just weeks before Saudi's de facto ruler, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, gave the go-ahead for the long-awaited reform, she was arrested. Human rights groups called on world leaders to use last week's virtual G20 summit in Riyadh to pressure MBS to allow her release. Instead, days after the event wrapped, Hathlul appeared before a judge, only to learn her case was being referred to a notorious terror court.
I believe the charges have to do with receiving money from hostile governments in order to pass it on to dissidents and hostile groups to Saudi Arabia.
So far, the Saudi government hasn't published its evidence, and Saudi's courts, where evidence would be presented, are notoriously difficult to access. International pressure for Hathlul's release isn't working. Unclear if President-elect Joe Biden, who was promised to take a tough line on Saudi, can make a difference.
We're not subject to pressure. These individuals are arrested under our laws.
Hello, so in this slide we will listen to an Arabic text and then I want you to render it into English. Well, so we can look at your translation and your lesson, and also you practice your listening practice and your translation. And that's how things start. Hear this excerpt out and then do the translation. Later send it to me for assessment and feedback. Okay, be ready and hear this out.
دعا العاهل الأردني الملك عبد الله الثاني خلال استقباله الرئيس الفلسطيني محمود عباس إلى تكثيف الجهود الدولية من أجل إنهاء الصراع الفلسطيني الإسرائيلي على أساس الديوان الملكي الأردني. الرئيس عباس أكد أن عملية السلام تقف اليوم أمام خيارين، إما السلام العادل الذي يفضي إلى إنهاء الاحتلال وإقامة الدولة الفلسطينية وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية، أو استمرار الصراع الذي تعمقه الانتهاكات المتواصلة لحقوق الشعب الفلسطيني التي تقوض كل فرص تحقيق السلام حسب تعبيره. من المتوقع أن يغادر عباس الأردن غدا متوجها إلى القاهرة للقاء الرئيس المصري عبد الفتاح السيسي. دعا البرلمان الإيراني إلى وقف زيارات المفتشين الدوليين إلى المنشآت النووية بعد اغتيال العالم النووي محسن فخرزادة قرب العاصمة طهران يوم الجمعة الماضي. اتهم أعضاء في البرلمان إسرائيل بالوقوف وراء العملية وقالوا إن منع زيارات المفتشين هي إحدى خطوات الرد على مقتل فخرزادة وفق بيان لهم. مثل أمام محكمة في باريس 4 من عناصر الشرطة اعتقلوا بعدما ظهروا في تسجيل مصور وهم يضربون منتجا موسيقيا أسود البشرة. يجري تحقيق بشأن العناصر الذين تم فصلهم من الخدمة وتوقيفهم لدى المفتشية العامة للشرطة بتهم ارتكاب أعمال عنف بدافع عنصري والإدلاء بشهادات كاذبة. برزت القضية بعدما نشر موقع لوكساندير صورا تظهر رجلا أسود يدعى ميشيل يتعرض للضرب على أيدي شرطيين عند مدخل استوديو موسيقي في باريس. قال ميشيل إنه كان يتجول في مكان قريب من دون قناع وجه، وعند رؤية سيارة دورية شرطة ذهب إلى استوديو الموسيقى الخاص به لتجنب الغرامة المنصوص عليها عند عدم الالتزام بلبس الكمامة. يخضع طبيب أسطورة كرة القدم الأرجنتيني الراحل دييغو مارادونا إلى التحقيق بتهمة القتل غير العمد بعد 4 أيام من وفاة الفتى الذهبي من جراء أزمة قلبية في منزله وفق وكالة الأنباء الأرجنتينية. تهمت الشرطة عيادة ومنزل الطبيب ليوبولدو لوكي بحثا عن أدلة حيال إهمال مهني محتمل بعد تقديم ابنة مارادونا تصريحات شككت فيها في الرعاية الصحية التي كان يتلقاها والدها. توفي مارادونا أثر أزمة قلبية عن عمر ناهز 60 عاما. المزيد على رأس الساعة. إلى اللقاء.
أوكي، الآن ننتقل إلى استماع جزء آخر من النشرة العربية على فرانس 24. يلا معي اسمعوا.
يعني صارمة وبعيدة في هذه المرحلة، ولكن هي بداية مهمة وممتازة لأنها تثبت أن ليس هناك يعني جهاز أعلى من القانون، والقانون سيطبق، وهذه مبادرة مهمة وتؤكد أن دولة القانون هي راسخة والمؤسسات تعمل، وكل تجاوز سيقع يعني إيقافه والتتبعات ستكون مستمرة.
لكن المشكلة سيد مجيد بودن هي ما يقوله المراقبون والساسة في فرنسا بأن هذه المحاكمة، هذه ربما المطالبات من قبل النيابة العامة لم تكن لتكون لولا هذا الفيديو، ولكان ميشيل زكلير في السجن الآن. هل هناك خلل وكيف يجب إصلاح هذا الخلل ولا سيما من قبل ربما أجهزة مراقبة الشرطة؟
أولا يعني هذا القانون والفصل 24 منه لا يجب أن يمر، لأن
تتحدث عن القانون الأمن الشامل سيكوريتي جلوبال،
الأمن الشامل، هذا سوف لن يمر، وهناك الآن إجماع على إعادة النظر في هذا القانون، لأن هذه الفقرة هي تضرب يعني وتغير قانون الصحافة ل 1881 والذي له أكثر من قرن، وهو الذي يحمي الصحافة ويحمي حرية الصحافة، والصحافة يجب أن تكون هي السلطة التي تخرج الأدلة، وبالتالي فإن منعت كما كان يريد هذا الفصل الصحافة من تقديم عملها، فإن هذا سيكون تقهر كبير في حرية الرأي وفي حرية الصحافة وفي حرية الإدلاء بالأدلة في المحاكم.
أوكي، توكم إلى نسخة من اللغة الإنجليزية ونسخة من اللغة العربية. نحتاجكم تاخذوا قلم وورقة وتقامزوا وتحللوا النص، تطبقوا الأدوات اللي هي عرضناها في المحاضرات السابقة والتقنيات والأدوات، بحيث أن كيف ممكن تقدروا تنقلوا الجزئيات هذوما من لغة إلى أخرى. في السلايد اللي فات، في العرض اللي فات هذا اللي قبل هذا، من اللغة الإنجليزية إلى العربية نبيكم تنقلوها، وهذه من اللغة العربية إلى اللغة الإنجليزية، ومن ثم تكتبوها في ورقة وتسلموها كواجب بحيث أن نطلع عليها وتخضع إلى التقييم إلى إبداء الرأي، وحتكون لكم تجربة حلوة. وهذه هي الترجمة كجزء من بياناتها ومعلوماتها، والنظري يظل نظري بدون تدريب، والتدريب مهم. مع التدريب يقولوا practice makes perfect، التمارين يصنع الكمال. So the more you practice, the more you learn, and the more you be more professional. Thank you. Good luck. Do your best and wish you the very best in your endeavors. Thank you for listening and goodbye.